You're listening to Hopeful by Nature. This is the podcast where we inspire hope by talking to people around the globe who are working to connect communities and kids to the natural world, to care for and protect the places where we play. You know, as an environmental leader, I've always defined myself in part by my relationship with nature. In my early 20s, this meant being radical, surfing big waves, sailing open oceans, and climbing steep pitches. When I became a dad at 23, I felt an immense pressure to continue in this effort. This week on the podcast, we'll be talking to a dad and nonprofit program manager in the northeastern corner of Maine about how life's transitions have an influence on our relationship with adventure in the outdoors. Inspired by his dad's journey to connect with place, this new father is grappling with what it means to reconcile a relationship with adventure in the midst of transitioning into fatherhood. This is Scott Shepard, your host, and you're listening to Hopeful by Nature. My guest today is a dad, educator, conservationist, dedicated to creating, enhancing, and protecting public access to the outdoors. Alex is a close friend of mine. He has years of experience leading groups into the outdoors and 5 years of experience in wilderness therapy. In his personal life, I know Alex has traveled all over the world, from riding motorcycles in Baja California to skiing glaciers in Iceland. That was just a few weeks ago. Alex's work has taken him from the Sierra Nevada mountains of California to the high desert and Colorado Rockies. He now works as regional stewardship manager with the Maine Island Trail Association, where he leads groups of staff and volunteers to engage in trail stewardship projects on outlying islands of Northeast Maine. I'm really excited and honored to welcome my good friend, Alex Terry. Alex, thanks for coming.
Thanks, Scotty. Thanks for hosting.
Of course. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling pretty good. I'm just getting all of our volunteer skipper program going on at work. So we're this group of volunteers all across the coast. They take the boats and do a bunch of monitor runs. So we're gearing up for the summer season, even though it doesn't feel very much like summer here. It's pretty wet and cold.
Right now in the Santa Cruz Mountains, it's pretty beautiful and warm and comfortable. Don't mean to rub your face in it or anything. So for people that are listening at home, tell us about yourself. Who are you? What brings you here today?
I grew up in New England and had a kind of a young exposure to just outdoor freedom and joy. A lot of time to spend scampering around the forest behind my parents' house and just spending time outside, getting dirty. I feel really lucky I had parents who were really supportive and encouraging to get me outside. Things that I learned as a kid, I built through those experiences, carry them into my adult life and my professional world. Recently, within the last year, my wife and I and our 19-month-old child, we moved back to the East Coast to be a little closer to family with the intention to raise our family in the ecosystem that we both grew up in, and then be able to see grandparents and all that.
We are in similar stages of life right now. I've got a 16-month-old at home. Having those grandparents close by is pretty valuable. Mine are 6 to 8 hours away, but they try to make it up here as often as they can.
They're still 4 hours away compared to a 16-hour travel day. In addition to that, the quality of time has been going up. When I spend time with my brother-in-law, for example, I have 2 kids. It feels less of we got to jam pack this in, and then we got to go see my dad and my sister. And I still got a buddy that lives in New England that I would like to see before we got to jump back on an airplane and fly back across the country and go back to work.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a little more relaxed, a lot more quality engagement is able to happen through those experiences. It's been a hard transition back to the Northeast in a way, and it's also been a lot of really beautiful moments.
Totally. Well, I know you're a high-level engagement guy through your friendships, through your adventures. What really got you started in those kind of adventures? Were there any pivotal moments in your adolescence or early childhood where you felt oh, this is something that I want to do for the rest of my life?
I think in the way that my father in particular talked about adventure and his excitement around it was a really pivotal piece. My father is at this point in time completely blind, and growing up he was always visually impaired, not able to drive, but he also had a robust adventure background, riding his bicycle across the country and camping and canoeing and had stories of those kind of adventures and would get excited about adventures, bring me into the sport of skiing or mountain biking or canoeing, which turned into paddling whitewater and other sea kayaking adventures. I worked on a high school trail crew when I was 15 and 16. And then the Dinosaur National Monument, I was able to like see the American West for the first time and realized that like that's where I want to head. At some point, every family in like the Western United States like left what they knew in the Eastern United States, particularly like those of European descent, and at some point like broke away from their family. I did that for 15, 16 years.
I gotta say, you mentioned that your dad is fully blind now. When you grew up, he was always visually impaired, but he had biked across the United States. What is the nature of your dad's visual impairment?
My dad has glaucoma. If he was born today, he would have had full sight, but the medical treatment wasn't available.
Yeah.
My dad was kind of fed this story that it really wasn't worth getting an education, and my dad wrote that off as bullshit. And instead, went to college in Boston, and then ultimately worked on getting like a doctorate degree in law. And some point in his late 20s, he had like lost all of his vision for a short stint, and then came back. And when he finished law school and flew to Oregon and rode across the country the way that he described it, it's like a lot of like a really incredible trip, met a really incredible people. He spent a lot of time with like the white line just to the left of his wheel, being able to really only see that much. And then rolling into the town, kind of trying to find wherever he could, which oftentimes was like a bar, and walking in and be like, "Hey, how do you get to the next town?" And I'm like, "Here's a map." And I'm saying, like, "Well, I can't read the map. Like, can you give me directions?" And then be like, "What do you mean you can't read a map?" Right. And then like throwing him a big party and sending him on his way to the next town. That story in particular was like really motivating. Growing up, I have a big map of the United States on my wall with like his um the drawn route that he took.
Wow.
So it was always this background tale that he had, which ultimately like motivated a trip, took some of his gear. And I flew to Cancun, Mexico with a good friend of Scott and I's, Alex Klink, and we rode across southern Mexico and then like dipped down into Guatemala and finished in Belize, kind of taking the thing that I learned from my things that my parents did and taking it to like the next level.
I don't know anyone who's blind who's ridden their bike across the United States with the exception of your dad. And I've heard him tell that story before about like going into the bar and explaining, yeah, sorry, I can't read this map. I'm actually blind. And what are you doing? I'm riding my bike across the country. Let's get this guy a beer, you know?
Yeah,
I can
yeah,
only imagine
yeah.
what that must have been like.
Totally. What I really like about bike touring, which I think was just so much more amplified in the early 80s when my dad was doing this without being able to see, is that you're just so vulnerable on a bicycle. At some point, you're hungry and tired and it's getting dark and you don't know where you're going to sleep. And then there's also so many moments on a bike trip where like the world swoops you up. A lot of those looked like just being welcomed in for dinner and sleeping in someone's backyard, and people showing care and love and the two-way interest of want to know like, why are you here on this bicycle, and also like wanting to know what it's like to like live in the place that you are. And
I feel like traveling really brings out the best in you as a person. You're more willing and able to accept and meet new people than you ever really are in your home city when you're adventuring somewhere new or novel. And not just that, but when you are a traveler, if you're in the right place at the right time, people will swoop you up and they are really invested in the stories and experiences that you have to share. I had the opportunity to experience that at 16 years old, sailing nearly all the way around the world. And in some of the places where we traveled, people would say, oh, I hope you've come here to help procreate the next generation of islanders, you know? And that's like, that's a next level of hospitality, you know?
Yes, very much so.
But enough on that. I mean, I know that like your dad, aside from being accomplished cyclist, was a really accomplished disability advocate. Am I right in that he worked in part with the Obama administration at some point?
He's like always been a disability advocate. He still is very passionate about people with disabilities and their access to voting, and has worked like a lot on like that component of the ADA in his like earlier parts of his career. He ran for his, like the lion's share of his professional career in like the largest nonprofit in the state of New Hampshire, which um, it provided in-home services. They also was an advocate for people with disabilities and like their ability to work and hold meaningful, gainful employment. As a part of that, he spent a fair bit of time in Washington, D.C. as a lobbyist and building relationships down there. He was asked to join um, the Obama administration's Council of Disabilities, and then ultimately ended up being the chair of that organization, and then into the
Wow.
like first year of Trump's first term.
I can only imagine, you know, the whiplash that he must have experienced, like working in this sector that's focused on improving inclusion, equitable access, diversity, and then a new president that says, "Oh, the government shouldn't be involved in DEIA at all. Like, let's just end this, and let's just stop funding just about everything that's positive and good." I mean, not to get overly political, but did your
Yeah,
dad ever share anything with
and
you about
now
that?
the one thing you told me like right away was like, oh yeah, we had to like reach out to the Trump administration and say like, hey, the website is not accessible for people with disabilities and their accessibility devices. Like you need to like change that. So many people who are working in the world of advocacy um, right now, it's challenging
Yeah.
to like feel progress, and then like creeping back. I do think my dad and other advocates that I know, like they definitely follow the title flow. Progress is not just in a direction, but it
Yeah.
is like this like ebb and flow. Like you make gains that you don't and you lose it all. It's like it's much more like a proper expedition where like you think it's gonna be linear and it's just not.
You're talking about like access and advocacy being this expeditionary experience, and your dad had this expeditionary experience that's incredibly novel that so few people have the opportunity to take part in. I can imagine that he took lessons away from biking across the country and the resilience that was built through that type of outdoor experience into his work. I'm curious, you have really championed outdoor access through a lot of your work by building trails, by leading stewardship, by taking teens into the outdoors. Do you feel that was inspired at all by some of your dad's experience and some of your dad's perspective on the importance of advocacy and access?
Definitely. It's like sometimes I lay awake at night like wondering how am I gonna get like my dad to an island? Like my dad's in his mid 70s and challenges physically and not being able to see the value of any like people getting outside. We all have different challenges, but those people who have like additional barriers through like seeing my dad move through those challenges, it's motivated me to like look into what would it take to build like trail that is 32 inches wide on the tread, but if we go to 36 inches, you can run an adaptive mountain bike on it. Asking those questions.
I know like you and I met when we were studying adventure education together at Fort Lewis College in Durango, Colorado. Really, the focus of that field of study was how can we lead people into the outdoors? How can we facilitate experiences that keep people physically and emotionally safe? In my work, I've really tried to leverage that learning to improve access for folks that experience marginalization or experience a lack of belonging outside or cultural barriers to getting outdoors. You have this really unique perspective where you're bringing in disability into your work as you're designing trails, as you're building trail systems. I also know that you had a pretty serious bike accident when we were in college together at Fort Lewis. Did that bike accident have any influence on your relationship with the outdoors, with your motivation to go on these high level adventures that you're engaging in today?
Those are all really true. The bike accident that you speak of is like an element of my coming into adulthood, finding like a ton of freedom. I was raft guiding in northern Maine the summer after my freshman year of college, and really just like all gas. Like the foot is on the gas pedal. Like I was pretty out of control, leading like a life that was an unsustainable path, and then returning to college, borrowing someone's tandem bike, and one thing led to another in the evening, and crashing and kind of having a TBI, getting flown to Denver, and then alerting my parents that like who came and visited and thought they were going to lose their son. That was sort of the first step of like, you can't operate in this, like in the world, looking as far ahead as your nose.
Yeah. You can't
It's
just
like,
be staring at the white line to the left of your tire, you
yeah,
know?
yeah, like you got to like see a little farther, and actions had consequences. There's a lot you can teach a young kid about consequences, contrived and natural, and this was like a pretty like hard natural consequence that really could have gone this direction. The accident, I'd say, like was a key role of like not necessarily like producing like hard adventure professional stuff all the time, and I try
Yeah.
to work in the outdoors from a perspective of like conservation, doing trail work or restoration work on the landscape, and not necessarily just playing on it, saving that for how I care and take care of myself in the adventure realm. um,
Can you explain what a TBI is exactly? That's not super clear to me.
yeah, so TBI is a traumatic brain injury, um, and it comes from major impact to your head and brain. Mine looked like a frontal cortex bruising, and they could lead to a whole lot of challenges. Broken bones in my face. I was told that there's a chance and a risk that I might never be able to become like a fully functioning adult. The reality of it for me was like, I think for all like youth being like under 26, where the frontal lobe becomes developed, uh, there's key moments that hit that scream like, "You gotta get your shit together. I'm not invincible." This was like a major one for me, and I'd be lying if I said it was the last. Um, and being a parent now, looking back on those experiences that went through, there's just like so much that goes into it, from the friends that I meet and the relationships that I built and the experience that I had, all combined with just like a big old pot that requires luck. So I think that'd be kind of like the bow tie on that. Was like, it was one of many experiences that just like lessons learned in that area of my life.
What I heard you say in that last part was how your perspective has shifted as you've become a parent. And
Mhm.
I became a parent. I was like 24 years old when my son Finn was born. He's entering pre-teendom right now. And the reason that I really bring that up is you and I both have experienced life in a way that empowers us to see adventure and to see experiences in the outdoors as a huge aspect of our identity, which I'm incredibly grateful for. And when I became a dad, I was really nervous that that was going to end. I was really afraid that becoming a dad meant that I needed to not just, like, to use your phrasing, get my shit together, but change the decisions that I was making. I had to change my priorities, and I wasn't going to be able to continue maintaining a relationship with the outdoors. And I'm curious, like, as you've become a dad, how does adventure play in your relationship with your son? And knowing your dad had such an incredible influence on your inspiration to engage in outdoor experiences, like, what kind of hopes and dreams do you have for the connection that your son has with the outdoors?
Yeah. I think I had a lot of expectation. of both who I was going to be as a dad, who my wife and I were going to be as parents, how Samson was going to step like into our lives, and it was just going to be this like smooth transition, and he was just going to come right along. Turns out that didn't really happen as I had expected or anticipated. For those of you who are not parents, when like a newborn, all they really want is to nurse and sleep and feel like safe and just get to know like what their skin is like. I really felt like if we are not pushing it from the beginning, it will be how our life is forever. And it's just like as like a newborn is like they don't like lay there at like a ball of cute. That newborn face is so short, but it was like really hard for me to see that from the beginning. You know, there are a handful of times early on, like under 3 months, where I was the instigator. I like really wanted to do a thing, and my wife, she was like, it was like, I don't know, and I was like, we got to do this, or else we're not like if we don't drive this dirt road up to this lake today and have a picnic, we're just gonna be inside people forever. One of like the most pinnacle moments when Samson was 6 weeks old. Uh, we left and we drove from California to the Northeast with like our truck and our slide-in pop-up camper in November. So it's cold and wet. It wasn't a nice pop-up camper. It was 1975 and we like rebuilt it, but we didn't necessarily always know what we were doing when we did it. And so the heater worked sometimes and it worked really well when we were two adventurers and didn't have kids and could drive around and go skiing and sleep out of it. If the heater didn't work, it's all good. So we had like a great night. We got to a Spencer Hot Springs in Nevada. We left at 5 at night, and Samson essentially slept the 5-hour drive to get there. And it was like, this is going to be an incredible trip. And it was just like from that moment onward, it was like this perpetual downhill challenge of like, oh, we bit off more than we could chew.
Yeah.
You know, we got into we're like driving through Indiana. Samson's sick. I also got food poisoning. Jesse's driving. I'm in the back seat with Samson. I have Samson's diaper down my pants. We're just like trying to make miles. We get to a hotel, a chain hotel. I'm not going to name it. And we check in. I'm sick. I'm in bed. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm sweating. Jesse's up with Samson because he's sick. It turns out when you're up when a child is sick and they're, you know, at that young, you're just up. Somebody's up with them all night.
Yeah.
And Jesse looks over at me laying naked, sweating on this bed, and there's bed bugs on the bed. And so then we got to just like move and like dry all of our clothes and like fix this problem that we all of a sudden have. And so it's like these like bumps that would be like a bummer and now feel catastrophic.
Yeah.
And ultimately it was high, but we made it to the East Coast. And I had this idea while we're on the East Coast visiting family, trying for this like unrushed, rested time, which it was not. I decided, we need to go stay in this uninsulated cabin that we could hike to. And if we don't do it,
Cool.
we're
Yeah.
gonna be inside people. We're not gonna adventure. Come on.
Yeah.
Like we can't say no to this. Anyway, we like get to the cabin, we like carry all the things in. It's howling wind, blowing snow. It is really heinous. And it's like the longest half-mile walk I've ever done. We get there and the wood stove, we can get it lit, but it doesn't latch. So it's either like hot, 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 and then dies. And so it's like kind of broken and it's 16 degrees out and there's slats in the walls and it's blowing through. I would go ahead and say like Samson was fine during this whole thing.
Yeah.
Like we were able to keep him
Yeah.
cozy and warm once we got him. He wasn't like strapped. The wind was not pounding him in the face. But we were just up all night and our plan was to stay there for 2 nights. And around 4 o'clock in the morning, we had the discussion that we're leaving in the morning.
Yeah.
And that's going to be it. That trip went on. We visited family. Ultimately, Jesse flew back. We like finished the trip overall at a high note because we needed to have this experience of like, not just like trying to like adapt Samson to our old life. But instead, we're this new people. And we're in this new phase that we don't actually know who we're going to be. We refer to it as the chrysalis, like when a caterpillar, before they become a butterfly, like they crawl into their cocoon. And if you were to like cut it open, we're like goo. And we're in the goo phase. That ultimately was this realization for me and Jesse, like we both of us, oh, we're in this goo phase. Now we're parents.
Yeah.
And the adventure needs to come from like bringing Hampson in. It's not like strap on, dude. But instead, the adventure of wandering around in the backyard is so much of an adventure for him. It's mind blowing, even though for us, oh, we're just stuck at home. And I think I'm coming around to like finding like the joys of like seeing Samson like grow and do things, particularly now 19 months old. He's got his strider bike, he's gliding, moving all over the place. And it's like a really beautiful experience to see and observe, learning about like the outdoors. I think if we create the opportunity as parents, he's going to gravitate to it. The outdoors is a force. And I think I'm at really high risk of like shoving it in his face so hard that he hates it. And so I'm like, that experience when he was like young enough to like, I think we got like a free pass. I don't think he hates road trips or hates going like to cabins. I think we get, but if that happened, like, if I was still like trying to do my own thing and bring him along, eventually he might have like feel like I'm not interested in this at all.
I mean, I find that incredibly relatable. You and I are crazy people, obviously. And uh, when my son was 3 months old, I decided it was a really good idea to road trip to Telluride from San Diego. And he was born at sea level and got altitude sickness and an ear infection. And we wound up in the emergency room in Telluride at like 3 o'clock in the morning because we didn't have Tylenol and he had a fever. And I'll never forget the feeling of like his little hand touching my back and just feeling the heat of his fever on my skin and just like thinking like, oh my God, I am the worst possible human in the history of the universe, but I think without those kinds of chrysalis moments, like you say, like we don't emerge as the butterfly parents that we really want to be, like the types of dads that help our kids really to connect with the outdoors. And we've been chatting for quite a while and we've gone a whole plethora of different topics, and I'm so appreciative of all the stories that you've been willing to share, ranging from like your dad's experience biking across the country blind to a traumatic brain injury to traumatizing our children as early fathers. If you were going to say to our listeners, however many there are, maybe there's 2, maybe there's 7, what would you say to help them inspire the next generation to connect with the outdoors? If you were going to tell them one thing to do as soon as they're done listening, what do you think they could do?
I think reduce your expectation. Like a connection with the outdoors can just look really different for a variety of different people. I'm really guilty of in the past, like judging how somebody enjoys the outdoors if you like to not get it. It's not rad enough. And like what I'm doing, is this where does fall in like the get rad category?
Sure.
The reality is like it doesn't matter. What's important is the experience of grounding oneself and being connected with the earth and like observing its natural movements, whether you're like paddling whitewater or going to like a very popular area and like getting to see something magnificent that lots of other people want to go see at the same time. Take pictures and enjoy by sharing it on your social media. That's great too. This can look really different for each person. And instead of being open to the different possibilities for someone to connect. I am really passionate about outdoor access. And I was interviewing for a job right before I got this job at the Main Island Trail Association. One of the things that the person who interviewed me said, it's like, access can look like just having enough toilet paper in the bathrooms. For me, it was like, a good way to put it, that is outdoor access, creating a space where someone feels comfortable. Typically, like for many of us, like going to the bathroom outside of like a well-plumbed bathroom that's in someone's house can be a pretty uncomfortable situation. And I feel like creating like a safe space for that to exist in an outdoor setting is access. Finding like the little ways that people enjoy without passing judgment on how someone else uses the outdoors, and assume that no one's passing judgment on you, as long as like one is respectful. It allows for like more encouragement and more engagement.
Absolutely. Outdoor access, like you said, looks different to different people based off of their opportunity, experience, knowledge, equipment, economic viability. All kinds of different factors are at play. And at its core, if we want to create a generation of young people that feel connected to the outdoors, we have to create spaces that are physically and emotionally safe. And to your point, like sometimes that just means having enough toilet paper in the bathroom, or sometimes that means like having a trusted, loving adult who you know isn't going to put you into harm's way. Sometimes as that trusted, loving adult, you have to remember that we all have certain capacity, and just because you or I really enjoy experiencing something at a high level doesn't mean that everybody else does, and that's okay. A walk at a neighborhood park can be just as impactful on a young person's relationship with nature as a backpacking trip. It just depends on how you frame it. So again, like I just am so appreciative of your time today, Alex. I'm wishing you the best of luck with the Maine Island Trail Association. I know that you're doing incredible work helping people of all ages to be stewards of the places where we play. So I hope you keep it up. Keep telling me amazing stories about all the great work that you're doing, and thanks again.
Thanks for having me, Scotty. Appreciate it.
You've been listening to Hopeful by Nature. If you'd like to learn more about Alex and the Maine Island Trail Association, you can visit our website at wildwardinstitute.net. That's WILDWARD Institute.net, where you can read about our conversation and see photos from his travels across the globe. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to hit that subscribe button and leave us a review to let us know how we can improve and what we're doing that inspires you. Next week on the podcast, we'll be exploring how 2 Australian water risk managers are using grassroots community organizing strategies to engage their neighbors in environmental literacy and stewardship.
And because of that community, we've had supported each other through a couple of relationship breakups and deaths. Sarah's had 3 children during this time as well. So, there's been a lot of things that have happened, but we've really supported each other through that.
Yeah, sometimes, life's really busy and everything feels overwhelming, but you do it, you show up, and it's always worth it. It's so nice to have that. It's just a mutual love of food, really, that brings us together, and a bit of a professional link as well. But, the conversations around that table are invaluable. And I think it is one of those sort of things where you're prioritizing your community and yourself, and having a good time and eating and drinking and chatting, and it's given a lot of meaning and joy to me.
That's next week on Hopeful by Nature.